Some mornings, I can still smell the cordite and dust from that rooftop in Syria. It's been 3 years, but the memory lives in my hands and the weight of my rifle, the crosshairs settling on a target. That the intelligence briefing had called HVT-7 confirmed terrorist facilitator, imminent threat to American forces. What they hadn't mentioned in that sterile briefing room was that he'd look barely old enough to shave. 19, maybe 20. The same age as my little brother back in Denver. I took the shot. Perfect execution. The after-action report praised my surgical precision and unwavering commitment to mission success. They pinned a commendation on my chest while I stood there wondering if the boy's mother knew yet. If she'd ever understand why her son had to die, or if she'd just add my face to the long roster of American devils who'd stolen her future. That night, I requested transfer to non-combat roles. My commanders didn't ask questions. Warriors who'd given everything earned the right to step back when they needed to. 6 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Jordan Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment, top of her class, an expert marksman with 7 weapon systems, became Mitch the Cook at Forward Operating Base Sentinel in eastern Afghanistan. For 3 years, I hid behind hairnets and industrial mixers. I served scrambled eggs at 600, mediocre stew at 1,200, and whatever I could create from military rations at 1,800. The SEALs who came through my line called me Mitch, with the casual affection reserved for reliable support staff. They had no idea that the quiet woman serving their coffee had once been one of the Army's most promising special operators. I found peace in that anonymity, in feeding people instead of hunting them, in the simple rhythm of prep, cook, serve, clean, repeat. Every morning was predictable. Every night I slept without dreams of that Syrian rooftop. Then came October 15th, and my carefully constructed sanctuary shattered like glass under a hammer. The first explosion hit at 5:32 hours, just as I was kneading dough for the morning's bread. The sound-distant crump of an RPG sent muscle memory blazing through my nervous system before my conscious mind could catch up. My hands froze mid-motion, flour dust hanging in the still air like fallout. Around me, the kitchen staff barely reacted. Probably just ordnance disposal. Jenkins muttered, not even looking up from his coffee. But I was already counting, analyzing. 3 seconds, second explosion northeast. 4 seconds, third explosion southeast. Professional spacing, coordinated fire. They were systematically targeting our communications equipment and power generation systems. This isn't harassment fire. This is surgical. The base alarm shrieked to life, condition red. All personnel to defensive positions. Through the mess hall windows, I watched soldiers scramble toward predetermined positions, while officers shouted coordinates through radio static. The Afghan sun was just beginning to paint the mountains gold, but the beauty was lost in the chaos of smoke and running figures. Then I saw where the real attack was heading, and my blood turned to ice. Building 6, SEAL Team Phantom's barracks. Yesterday morning, Lieutenant Commander Cole Brennan had sat at my counter, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile, as he joked with his second-in-command, Senior Chief Victor Ortega, about whose turn it was to lose at poker. Mitch makes eggs that almost make this hellhole bearable, Brennan had said, raising his coffee mug in mock salute. Ortega had laughed that easy practice laugh of a man who'd spent 15 years in special operations. Almost, sir. But let's be honest, nothing makes this place bearable. We're stuck in this godforsaken desert watching politicians play games with our lives while... He'd caught himself, glanced at me, then shrugged. Sorry, Mitch. You don't need to hear an old sailor's complaints. I'd smiled and refilled his coffee, not knowing those would be the last normal words I'd hear from him. Cooper, the youngest operator, had been asking about my cornbread recipe to send his mother. "She's gonna make it for Thanksgiving, Mitch. You're basically saving my family holiday." Now I watched through the window as dark-clad figures surrounded Building 6 with military precision. 20 attackers, maybe more. Modern weapons, coordinated movements that screamed professional military training. The battle lasted 7 minutes and 43 seconds. I timed it by the kitchen clock, my knuckles white against the counter edge. The SEALs fought like the elite warriors they were, but they were outnumbered, caught during downtime, and facing an enemy that had clearly trained for this exact scenario. Through the smoke and chaos, I watched them fall one by one, not killed, but tranquilized. The attackers wanted prisoners. Brennan went down first while covering his team's retreat. Ortega lasted longest, taking out 2 attackers before overwhelming force brought him down. Cooper fought with the desperate energy of youth until 3 tranquilizer darts finally dropped him. Within 15 minutes, all 12 members of SEAL Team Phantom were zip-tied and being dragged unconscious toward vehicles that had materialized from the desert like ghosts. The base's regular security forces were pinned down by diversionary attacks exactly where they needed to be for the real operation to succeed. This wasn't opportunistic terrorism. This was professional military planning executed with surgical precision. Someone had given these people everything: our defensive protocols, patrol schedules, reaction times. Someone had handed them SEAL Team Phantom on a silver platter. I stood in my kitchen flour, still dusting my hands, and felt something I'd buried 3 years ago begin to claw its way back to the surface. The nightmares about Syria had taught me I was too good at killing, too efficient at eliminating targets I'd been told were threats. But this, watching my people be taken while I hid behind an apron, that was a different kind of nightmare. One I could actually do something about. My hands moved with mechanical precision. Hairnet off, apron folded. I walked to the industrial freezer with steps that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Behind the cleaning supplies, no one else ever touched, because I'd carefully trained the staff to let me handle those harsh chemicals. My fingers found the waterproof case I'd hidden 3 years ago. The tactical knife felt like an old friend. So did the compact Sig Sauer P229. The suppressor, the spare magazines, and the equipment I'd carefully acquired during 3 years of just-in-case preparation. Not paranoia, strategy. For 3 years, I'd tried to be someone who fed people instead of fighting them. But watching those vehicles disappear into the Afghan landscape, carrying men who'd called me Mitch, and joked about my cooking, and never suspected what I really was. Sometimes the people you love need you to be dangerous on their behalf. Staff Sergeant Jordan Mitchell was back on active duty. The base communications center was damaged, but functional, exactly damaged enough to prevent external contact, but not destroyed. Professional work. I moved through smoke and chaos with tactical awareness I'd never truly forgotten, slipping past overwhelmed security personnel. The building was pandemonium, officers shouting into dead radios, enlisted trying to restore power. Everyone too distracted to notice the cook moving like a ghost through their crisis. The emergency protocols terminal was exactly where I remembered. I bypassed standard login with administrator credentials I'd acquired during my first month here. Old Ranger habits died hard. Access logs loaded. I cross-referenced them with the assault timeline, looking for the leak that had made this possible. The pattern emerged quickly. Someone with classified access had been systematically reviewing SEAL deployment schedules, defensive positions, guard rotations. The frequency had increased over the past 6 months, building toward today. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Pierce, executive officer, the man responsible for base security, had been accessing classified material far beyond his operational needs. I pulled his financial records, technically illegal, but I was way past caring about regulations. Bank deposits appeared at regular intervals, each corresponding with intelligence breaches. The most recent $50,000 2 days ago from an offshore account. But something felt wrong. Pierce was a bureaucrat, a paper pusher who'd never seen real combat. The kind of leak we were looking at required someone with tactical knowledge, someone who understood operational security from the inside. I dug deeper into the communications intercepts flooding in before the attack disabled our systems. Fragments of decoded enemy chatter. Phantom retrieval confirmed. Transfer at 600, exchange protocol initiated. Jackal 7 payment on delivery. The Jackals, my blood ran cold. They were mercenaries, professionals who sold their skills to the highest bidder. Known for precision kidnapping operations across 3 continents. They didn't work for causes or ideologies, they worked for money, which meant someone had paid them a fortune to grab SEAL Team Phantom. But why specifically target the SEALs? What made them worth the risk and resources? I found my answer in a fragmented transmission. 12 American special operators. Estimated exchange value $20 million plus 5 detained operatives. $20 million plus prisoner exchange. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a high-stakes negotiation before it even started. Whoever had hired the Jackals planned to auction off America's elite warriors to the highest bidder, whether that was hostile governments wanting intelligence or terrorist organizations wanting bargaining chips. The intercepted coordinates pointed toward an abandoned Soviet installation 30 kilometers east, large enough to hold prisoners, isolated enough to avoid detection, defensible enough to resist casual rescue attempts. I had maybe 18 hours before they transferred my team to a location where I'd never find them. The rational choice was to wait for official rescue operations. Proper authorization, full support, by-the-book mission planning. But rational choices took 72 hours minimum, and my team didn't have 72 hours. I thought about Brennan's rare smile over breakfast, Ortega's bitter jokes about politicians, Cooper's enthusiasm about a cornbread recipe. They'd spent their careers rescuing others from impossible situations. They deserved someone willing to do the same for them. Even if that someone was a cook who'd been hiding from herself for 3 years. The approach to the Soviet installation took 6 hours of movement through terrain that tested every skill I'd tried to forget. I moved through pre-dawn darkness like smoke, using dried riverbeds, for concealment, staying low against ridgelines to avoid silhouetting. The Afghan landscape was harsh and unforgiving dust that coated everything, heat that rose like a physical wall. Even before sunrise, the distant smell of burning trash from nomadic camps. My gear was minimal suppressed Sig Sauer tactical knife, 3 spare magazines, night vision monocular, borrowed from base supply 3 years ago, small medical kit. Light and mobile. The Ranger way. As dawn approached, I established overwatch on a rocky outcrop 400 meters from the facility. Through my monocular, I counted hostiles. 32. All armed with modern weapons, wearing tactical gear that confirmed these were the Jackals, professionals, not insurgents playing dress-up. Their patrol patterns were textbook military doctrine. Professional spacing. Proper communication protocols. These men had been soldiers once before. Money became their only loyalty. I watched for 2 hours, mapping guard rotations and identifying weaknesses. Their security was oriented inward, focused on preventing prisoner escape rather than detecting infiltration. At 14:30 hours, I observed something that made my pulse quicken. A man who appeared to be their commander stood near the central building conducting a satellite phone conversation. The wind carried fragments of his voice. All 12 targets secured. Transfer confirmed for 600 tomorrow. Negotiation with buyers proceeding. Payment on delivery $20 million plus 5 high-value prisoners. My jaw clenched. They were already shopping my team to the highest bidder. The commander's next words froze me. Inside contact confirms no rescue operations for minimum 72 hours. American protocol's too slow. We'll be across the Pakistani border before they finish paperwork. Inside contact. Someone at FOB's Sentinel had not only provided intelligence, but also assured the jackals they'd have time to complete their operation. Pierce had to be. As sunset approached, I finalized my plan. Evening prayers would create a 7-minute gap in patrol rotations. That was my entry window. The rear service entrance had a single guard. Isolated position. That was my breach point. At 1847 hours, as the call to prayer echoed across the valley, I moved. The final approach was 400 meters of open ground. Every rock, every shadow became cover. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat reminding me I was one mistake away from disaster. The rear guard was mid-prayer when I reached him. I felt a flash of guilt. He was just a soldier doing his job, probably convinced he was earning honest pay. But he stood between me and my people. The takedown was textbook. Rear naked choke pressure on the carotid arteries. He went limp in 7 seconds. I zip-tied him with his own restraints, gagged him, dragged him into shadows. Non-lethal. This was rescue, not revenge. The door lock was Soviet-era mechanical, poorly maintained. My picks had it open in 90 seconds. Inside was darkness dust and the smell of decades-old concrete. I moved through corridors with my suppressed pistol leading each corner cleared with precision I'd performed hundreds of times in training, dozens of times in combat. Then I saw the first guard patrolling an interior corridor. My finger found the trigger. Center mass. Easy shot. But my hand trembled. For just a moment, I saw not the mercenary in tactical gear, but the boy on that Syrian rooftop. Young. Someone's son. Someone who'd made choices that led him to this moment, just like the boy in Syria had made choices that led him to mine. The guard turned toward me. Training overrode hesitation. 2 suppressed shots. Center mass. He dropped without a sound. I stood over the body, my hand shaking, bile rising in my throat. Behind my eyes, 2 faces overlapped, the mercenary and the Syrian boy, both dead, because I'd been good at my job. Not now. Break down later. They need you now. I forced my breathing steady and continued forward. The holding area was on the 2nd floor. I neutralized 1 more guard on the stairwell, another silent takedown that would haunt me later, and positioned myself outside the heavy metal door. 4 guards inside, based on voices. My team was on the other side. I counted down from 3. Then I moved. The door crashed open. 4 guards spun toward me. I'd already acquired my first target, the one nearest the prisoners, the one positioned to execute hostages during a rescue. My suppressed SIG coughed twice. He dropped. Second guard was bringing his AK-47 up. I shifted, fired 3 rounds. 2 hit. He went down. Third and fourth guards scrambled for cover, shouting. I moved laterally, using the door frame as concealment muscle memory guiding shots I'd trained for thousands of times. Third guard dropped before reaching his weapon. Fourth managed a burst. Bullets sparked off metal inches from my head, the crack deafening in the enclosed space. I dropped to a knee, lined up my shot through trembling hands, and put him down. 4 seconds. 4 guards neutralized. 4 more faces to add to my collection of nightmares. 12 pairs of eyes stared at me from across the room, SEAL Team Phantom zip-tied against the far wall, bruised but alive. Mitch. Brennan's voice carried disbelief. Staff Sergeant Jordan Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment. My tactical knife was already out, sawing through his restraints. I'm here to take you home, sir. His eyes widened as circulation returned to his hands. You're a ranger. Our cook is... Can we discuss my resume later, sir? I moved to Ortega, cutting his zip ties with quick, efficient motions. We've got maybe 2 minutes before the entire facility responds. Ortega rubbed his wrists, his expression cycling through shock and professional assessment. Mitchell, you solo infiltrated a hostile facility. That's not cooking skills. I also make excellent lasagna, multi-talented. I moved to Cooper next. Cooper grinned, despite bruises covering his young face. Mitch, I'm never doubting you again. Mitchell. Brennan's command voice was back as he stood assessing our situation. Situation report. I freed the last seal, speaking quickly. Pierce is the leak. He sold you to a mercenary group called the Jackals for personal profit. They're planning to transfer you at 600 for a $20 million prisoner exchange. We've got approximately 30 hostiles in this facility. They weren't expecting rescue. Past tense, Ortega muttered, checking a fallen guard's AK-47. His voice carried that familiar bitter edge. They know now. Shouts echoed from the corridor. Boots thundered on metal stairs. Brennan's tactical mind was already working. Defensive positions. Mitchell, you know the facility layout. Best exfil route. Rear service entrance, eastern stairwell. 40 meters to exterior, minimal exposure. I neutralized guards along that route during infiltration. Outstanding. Brennan looked at his team. Gentlemen, time to leave. Mitchell takes point, she knows the way. I've got rear security. Ortega, you're running tactical coordination. Move out. We moved through the facility like a tactical hurricane. I led them through corridors. I'd cleared my suppressed pistol, making quiet work of scattered resistance. Behind me, the SEALs moved with practiced precision, covering angles with coordination that needed no words. But something felt wrong. Small things. Ortega's directions that took us past guard stations that should have been empty, but weren't. His accidental stumble that sent a metal pan clattering, alerting hostiles to our position. The way he lagged behind, always managing to be out of direct line of fire. I pushed the observations aside. Stress. Paranoia. We were in a hostile facility fighting for our lives. Of course, things felt wrong. We hit the eastern stairwell and began descent. Halfway down, 3 guards appeared on the landing below. Contact front. I dropped to a knee, giving the SEALs clear lines of fire. The stairwell exploded with gunfire. The guards managed one burst before concentrated SEAL firepower overwhelmed them. We continued down, stepping over bodies, moving with controlled urgency. 30 meters. I called back to Brennan as the rear exit appeared ahead. Copy, he replied. Ortega, prep frag on my... Then wait. Ortega's voice cut through the chaos. Sir, I think we should take the north exit instead. The eastern approach might be compromised. I froze. The north exit led through an open courtyard with zero cover. Tactical suicide. Negative, Brennan said firmly. Mitchell cleared the eastern route. We stick with her plan. Sir, with respect, Ortega started. That's an order, Chief. We burst through the rear door into pre-dawn darkness. Freedom smelled like Afghan dust and cordite and survival. But we'd only made it 50 meters when hostile fire erupted from positions that should have been clear. Ambush! Cooper shouted, diving for cover behind a boulder. We scattered, taking defensive positions as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. 7 jackal mercenaries had positioned themselves perfectly to catch us in a kill zone during our escape. How did they know? Brennan shouted over the gunfire. Mitchell, you cleared this route. I did. My mind was racing. They shouldn't be here unless... Understanding hit me like a physical blow. Unless someone told them exactly where we'd be exiting. Someone who'd been giving subtle sabotage throughout our escape. Someone who'd tried to redirect us to a worse kill zone when this one failed to materialize fast enough. I turned toward Ortega, and the look on my face must have told him I knew. For one frozen moment, we stared at each other across the darkness, the cook who'd been a ranger and the SEAL who'd become something far worse than an enemy. Then Ortega moved. His sidearm came up fast, but not pointed at the jackal mercenaries. Pointed at Brennan. I'm sorry, sir. Ortega said, his voice carrying 15 years of exhausted bitterness. But I'm done. I'm done watching politicians play games with our lives. Done risking everything for people who'll never appreciate it. Done pretending any of this matters. Cooper's voice cracked like breaking glass. Chief, what are you... The jackals offered me $5 million and safe passage out of this war. Ortega continued, his weapon steady on Brennan. All I had to do was deliver you. All of you. It was supposed to be clean, you'd be prisoners, I'd disappear, everybody lives. But then Mitchell had to be a hero. Brennan's face was stone, but I saw the pain flash through his eyes. Victor, you don't have to do this. Yeah, I do. Ortega's laugh was hollow. Because in about 2 minutes, 30 more jackals are going to surround this position, and the only way I'm walking out of here alive is if I give them what they paid for. He raised his voice, shouting toward the darkness. Hold fire, I have them contained. Brennan and the others are yours just like we agreed. The hostile fire stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear Cooper's ragged breathing, Brennan's careful assessment of tactical options, and the sound of footsteps as jackal mercenaries began closing in from multiple directions. We were trapped, surrounded, with a traitor inside our perimeter and professional killers outside. Ortega kept his weapon on Brennan, but his eyes flickered toward me. Mitchell, put down your weapon. You're good, but you're not good enough to take all of us. This doesn't have to end with more bodies. My SIG was already rising, targeting solutions, calculating automatically. I could take Ortega. Maybe. But the shot would alert the jackals, and we'd be slaughtered in the crossfire. But if I didn't take the shot, Ortega would hand us all over, and we'd disappear into the global hostage market. Torture. Propaganda videos. Years of captivity if we were lucky. Execution if we weren't. Through my peripheral vision, I saw Brennan's slight head shake. Don't. Not worth it. But he didn't understand. I'd spent 3 years hiding from violence, convinced that killing made me a monster. I'd buried myself in hairnets and industrial mixers, trying to forget the Syrian boy's face. But watching Ortega, a man I'd fed breakfast to, a man Cooper had trusted like a father figure, a man who traded his brothers for money and escape, I finally understood something I should have learned 3 years ago. The shot I took in Syria might haunt me forever. That boy might have been someone's son, and I'd never know if the intelligence was perfect or flawed or somewhere in between. But this, protecting the people I loved from a traitor who'd sell them to murderers. This was exactly what warriors were for. You're right, Chief, I said softly. This doesn't have to end with more bodies. Then I shot him in the shoulder. Ortega spun from the impact, his weapon flying from nerveless fingers. Brennan moved instantly, tackling him to the ground and zip-tying him with practiced efficiency. The jackal mercenaries opened fire, realizing their inside man had just been neutralized. What followed was the most desperate firefight of my life. We fought from cover, outnumbered and surrounded, trading fire with professionals who wanted us dead or captured. Cooper took a round through his thigh, screaming but still returning fire. I burned through my remaining magazines, each shot calculated and desperate. Brennan fought like a man possessed, covering us all with precision fire that kept the jackals from overwhelming our position. But we were losing. One by one, our ammunition was running dry. The jackals were closing in, tightening the noose. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. The rhythmic whump, whump, whump of approaching helicopters. Phantom 1, this is Sentinel Actual. A voice crackled over Brennan's radio. We have your position. Air support inbound 30 seconds. Keep your heads down. Later, I'd learned that the communications blackout had lifted just enough for automated distress beacons to transmit. That quick reaction force had been scrambled the moment my GPS tracker, hidden in my gear, had been detected 30 kilometers from base near a known hostile facility. But in that moment, all I knew was that Apache gunships were lighting up the darkness with 30mm cannon fire. And the jackal mercenaries were dying or fleeing, and we were going to survive. We were going home. The debrief lasted 3 days and resulted in classified reports I'll never be authorized to discuss. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce was arrested within hours of our return. Though his role proved less significant than we'd thought, he'd provided general intelligence for money. But the real operational details had come from Ortega. Pierce's trial was swift, dishonorable discharge, 20 years federal prison for treason. Ortega's trial was closed to everyone, except those directly involved. The man I'd served breakfast to, who joked about politicians and complained about the war, received life without parole in a military prison. No possibility of the escape he'd wanted so desperately. Cooper recovered from his leg wound, but something in his eyes had changed. The enthusiasm was gone, replaced by a wariness that hurt to see. He'd trusted Ortega like a father, and that betrayal had stolen something precious. Brennan never spoke publicly about what happened, but he recommended me for immediate reinstatement to active duty with any special operations unit in the military. Commendations, promotions, everything I'd walked away from 3 years ago. I declined them all. I'm not ready to be a full-time warrior again, I told him during our private conversation in his office. But I'm also not going to pretend I'm just a cook when my people need me. Brennan studied me with those calm, assessing eyes. What if there's a middle ground, a classified program that places former special operators in support roles at installations worldwide? Official position food service, real mission security oversight and crisis response. You want me to be exactly what I already am. I want you to be exactly who you are, he corrected. Not hiding, not pretending, just serving in the role that fits you. That conversation happened 6 months ago. Now I'm stationed at a different installation, serving breakfast at 600 to a different SEAL team who know my full story. They call me Mitch, too, but it's different now, respect for a warrior who chose to support rather than seeking glory. Under my industrial freezer, wrapped in the waterproof plastic behind cleaning supplies, is a cache of weapons I maintain with professional care. I hope never to need it again. But hope isn't a strategy. Late at night, when the kitchen is quiet, I stand at the windows and watch stars over whatever country I'm currently serving in. I think about the Syrian boy that shot I'll carry forever, the face that haunts my dreams. I think about Ortega, the man who'd seemed so trustworthy, whose betrayal nearly killed us all, who taught me that sometimes the enemy wears a familiar face. I think about the 4 jackal mercenaries I killed during the rescue, more faces for my collection, more weights added to the burden I carry. But I also think about Cooper alive, despite his wounds. Brennan home with his family. 10 other SEALs who didn't disappear into the hostage market because someone was willing to become dangerous on their behalf. The shot in Syria will haunt me forever. I'll never know for certain if that boy deserved to die or if I was just following flawed intelligence and convenient justifications. But the shots in that Soviet facility, the choice to pull the trigger on Ortega despite the consequences, those I can live with. Because I've learned that strength isn't about destroying everything in your path. It's about knowing when to be a weapon and when to be a shield, when to kill and when to protect, when to hide and when to fight. I'm Jordan Mitchell, former Ranger, current cook, always guardian. I serve scrambled eggs with the same dedication I'd bring to a tactical operation, because both are ways of protecting the people who protect all of us. And if the day comes when my people are threatened again, I'll be ready. Not because I want to fight. Because I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to carry the weight of violence so others don't have to. The nightmares still come. The Syrian boy, the jackal mercenaries, Ortega's bitter laugh as I shot him. But now, when I wake in darkness, I can also remember Brennan's rare smile over breakfast, Cooper asking about cornbread recipes, the sound of helicopters bringing us home. The weight of the knife cuts both ways. It can destroy, but it can also protect. And I've finally made peace with carrying both edges.